3 Conversations with George by Dennis Jefferies. "Have you read the news?" George asked, as he joined me in our regular corner seat in the saloon bar. "Which bit?" I responded, folding my Guardian and putting it on the table. "About the increase in the price of haircuts," he explained. "Oh, that? Does it worry you?" "Of course it worries me." George looked at me with pity. It was a silly question. Every little rise in the cost of living is a deliberate attack on people like you and me. "And how's that?" I replied. "Well, it's obvious, I should have thought. It's always the important things that get more expensive, the things that pensioners like us must have to keep respect." He nodded sagely as he poured the rest of his pint of bitter down his throat. "What sort of things are you talking about?" I asked, sipping my teachers. "You really are a bit dense today, my lad," he asserted. "What does it take to keep our self-respect if it isn't being able to pay our way, such as buying our own pint or looking smart by keeping our hair trimmed, or buying the Mirror to know what's going on?" "Well, yes, I see what you mean. And it's these things that keep getting dearer day by day, week by week, year by year. I don't see why putting up the price of a haircut is any worry to you," I remarked. He looked at me in astonishment. "I'm afraid I don't follow you," he said. "I thought it was clear. I thought I'd made it clear." I looked pointedly at the rapidly departing wisp of white hair surrounding the steadily increasing bald patch above his eyes. "It doesn't seem likely to be your problem," I suggested. A look of sorrow spread across his features, and he sighed deeply. "You know," he said, "I've always had a theory. It seems to me that our progress from ape man can be measured by the degree we have become able to do without hair. The ape men were all hair. The more civilized we become, the less hair we need." Rubbing his hand above his own bald pate, he looked for a moment at my own luxurious growth still covering my scalp. Then, with another deep sigh, he walked off slowly, shaking his head from side to side. There may be something in what he says, of course. I have always been struck by the polite and civilized way in which George insults people. Conversations with George, number 2. "All this violence," George growled, thumping his tankard on the table. "Far too much of it. It's all the government's fault, you know." "What are you talking about now?" I questioned, mopping the drops of beer off my trousers with my handkerchief. "Well, you've only got to look at your paper every day. You can't escape it. Robbery, murder, peace demonstrations, strikes, police brutality, mugging. And it's all that woman at number 10. With a shudder, I resisted the vision of Maggie Thatcher, not a hair out of place, leaping on me in a dark alley behind the Treasury and demanding my pension or my life as she stabbed me with her sharp nose. "How come?" I asked. "Violence begets violence," he told me. "If you've got a violent government, the masses respond in a violent way." "And this is a violent government?" I wondered. "Of course it is. More and more unemployment, galloping inflation, the end of state welfare, persons rather than people, the starving of education and the arts. It's all violence to our way of life. And what's the mass response? Mugging by uneducated kids, riots, strikes, and vandalism." He took a long drink of his beer. Do you know, someone's made a violent scratch down the side of my car, he snarled. Now I understood. So that's what brought it all on, I laughed. But you made that scratch yourself. What? When? How come? Last night, as you were driving me home, I explained. You got too close to Bill Smart's hedge down the lane after your 6 pints, and one of the branches scraped down the side. There was a pause, a long pause, and then, just what I said, he trumpeted. That bears out what I said. Maggie Thatcher appoints Ian McGregor to get the police to beat up the miners, so the price of steel goes up, and Bill Smart can't afford a new pair of shears, so he cuts his hair rather than his hedge, which grows across the road and ruins my car. And it's all because we got a violent government. It has to be admitted, there is a logic of some sort in George's arguments. Conversations with George, number 3. George came bursting into the saloon bar in a flurry of snowflakes, stamping his feet and puffing his red cheeks in and out. He was clearly feeling the cold, as we all were. The European community, he shouted across to me, as I toasted my toes and my second pint before a roaring fire. What about it? I asked, watching him grab the large tankard already prepared for him by our sometimes genial host. The weather, he replied, weaving through the tables to join me. What bees he got in his bonnet this time? Clive wondered, grabbing one of the 3 whiskies he had lined up on the mantelpiece. Clive never drank anything else, or any more. In one session, there it was, all doubles, and it took him exactly 20 minutes to drink each one. After an hour, he would stand up, stretch noisily, and stagger away. George always contrived to arrive for the final third of an hour. He and Clive didn't exactly hit it off. Political opposites, you understand. How do you mean the weather? I asked as usual, providing both the leading question and the opportunity for George to study me pityingly. Saw in the paper this morning, he explained. All this weather, it comes from Russia. Now, what does that tell you? Why, sometimes about high pressure in the east and low pressure in the west, I should think, I answered, not really being sure of my facts. Right, he agreed, to my surprise. High pressure it is, the high pressure that comes from 1,050,000 people all facing the same way and breathing out at the same time. I stared at him speechless, and he stared back. Well, you know how organised the Russians are, he went on. I bet that young chap Gorbachev has got them all so controlled they even breathe to numbers. And they are all facing towards Europe, looking for missiles falling from the sky. But what's that got to do with the European community? Clive put in. Doesn't know what it's doing, George explained. Not politically united. See? Not like the Soviets. Now, if we were to get together politically, we could all be trained to face east and breathe together like the Russians do. They wouldn't be able to blow on us because we'd be too strong for them. So we wouldn't get their weather, see? Clive's face took on a rapt expression, deep thoughts bringing a crease before his eyes. It looked like he was talking George and taking his theories seriously. Do the Chinese know about this? I asked George. Think what damage they could do to the Russians. Over 900 million of them. They're too small, George pointed out. Couldn't blow over the mountains. Oh, of course. I acknowledged his superior knowledge. At that moment, to my astonishment, Clive left his seat beside the fire and his half-empty whiskey glass, and began to walk away. He'd only been there for 45 minutes. It was unprecedented. I watched him as he weaved his way to the phone by the door and lifted the receiver. Believe anything that Clive, he laughed, comes of being a fascist. I bet you anything he's ringing the Met Office in London to ask what they are doing about the communist plot. He leaned back, stretched his legs to the blaze, and closed his eyes. He'll do anything for his creature comforts, will George?